Imagine a map. Picture the Indian subcontinent. The year is 1905. Now, to any outside observer, the British Empire is, well, it's at its absolute peak. You know, they have that famous saying, the sun never sets. And in India, their jewel in the crown, their control just seems total, unshakable.
It really did. It looked like a permanent fixture of the world.
But then you zoom right into a quiet wood-paneled room, probably in Simla, the summer capital. A decision is made. A British official, some high-ranking civil servant, picks up a fountain pen, dips it in ink, and draws this jagged line right through the heart of Bengal.
The partition. The moment they thought they were, just solving an administrative problem.
Exactly. The official reason was administrative efficiency, a neat, tidy, bureaucratic solution on paper. But for the people of India, they didn't see a bureaucratic line. They saw a knife.
A mutilation.
A deliberate mutilation of their culture, their language, their very soul. And that single line, drawn in ink, it would eventually be erased. But it wouldn't be erased by an eraser. It would be erased by blood, by sweat, and by a resistance movement that completely transformed a generation of polite petitioners into a roaring force for freedom.
It truly was the pivot point. It is the definitive moment where the entire era of the, let's call it the polite request, died, and the era of active resistance was born. If you want to understand modern India, you simply cannot skip 1905.
And that is exactly where we are going today. Welcome back to the deep dive. We are on a very specific, and I'd say high-stakes mission today. We are going to break down the Tamil Nadu Board Class 12 history book, and we're zeroing in on Chapter 14, the Indian National Movement. We're covering those critical years from the founding of the Congress in 1885 right up to that explosive year of 1905.
And this isn't just a simple history lesson. We're planning to strip this chapter down to the studs. We're going to look at how the Indian National Congress was actually born. And spoiler alert, it's probably not how you think it happened. We'll look at who these so-called moderates were and, why the temperature in the room suddenly spiked from mildly annoyed to, well, revolutionary at the turn of the century.
And crucially, for everyone listening, we aren't just reading the text. We are going to connect the dots for everyone preparing for the civil services. We're going to take this source material and link it directly to how the UPSC exam actually tests these concepts. We'll be looking at actual previous year questions or PYQs embedded right in our discussion.
That's the key differentiator, really. Information is one thing, but application is a completely different ballgame. We're going to try and bridge that gap between just reading the chapter and being able to confidently mark the correct bubble on the OMR sheet.
Which brings me to some absolutely vital housekeeping before we jump into the timeline. This deep dive is curated specifically for the Simplified UPSC by PPP YouTube channel. Now, if you are listening to this right now and you haven't subscribed yet, please, and I ask this very humbly, just take a second and hit that subscribe button. It really supports our mission to demystify this massive syllabus for everyone.
Absolutely. It helps the algorithm find other students who are also, struggling with this mountain of material. And for those of you who are capable, please consider supporting the team on Patreon. It takes a significant amount of resources to curate, to research, and to produce these deep dives. Your support literally keeps the lights on and keeps this content flowing.
And on that note, a huge heartfelt shout out to all our current supporters and patrons. You guys are the real MVPs. You help a lot in creating this content. Also, don't forget to like the video and share your valuable comments below. We actually read them. We really want to know what you think about these topics.
And for the students asking about materials, because we always get asked, the free notes, complete with practice previous year questions, are available right now on our public Telegram channel.
Yes, but if you want the all-access pass, and I'm talking about getting all the videos of this series at once, along with the premium notes, which have detailed breakdowns, extra PYQs, and even model mains answers, you need to join our private Telegram library. Just DM us on the public Telegram channel to join. Okay, logistics done. Let's look at the roadmap for today.
We have a packed agenda. We're going to start with what the book calls the awakening. It's a big question. How did a subcontinent with so many diverse languages and cultures start thinking of itself as one single nation? Then we'll look at the political associations that existed before the Congress.
And then the big moment, 1885, the birth of the INC. We'll unpack that whole moderate phase, their methods, and their single biggest contribution, the economic critique, the famous drain theory.
We will also shine a spotlight on the role of Tamil Nadu, as per our source text, which is so often overlooked in the standard narratives. And finally, we'll cover the shift to extremism and that explosive event, the Partition of Bengal.
So let's dive right in. Section 1, The Awakening. Set the scene for us. We're in the late 19th century. India is this massive, incredibly diverse subcontinent. How on earth did people even start thinking of themselves as one nation? Because that wasn't a given at all, was it?
Not at all. In fact, it's a fascinating paradox. The source text makes a very strong, almost ironic point here. The very machinery the British built to control India actually, in the end, helped unite it against them.
You mean they accidentally created the tools for their own opposition? That feels like a classic case of unintended consequences.
Precisely. Just think about it structurally. First, you have political unity. For the first time in its long history, a single power controlled the entire region, from the Himalayas right down to Kanyakumari. They introduced a uniform system of law and government.
So whether you were a merchant in Lahore or a lawyer in Madras, you were essentially dealing with the same bureaucracy, the same rules.
Exactly the same rules. You were dealing with the same colonial master, the same legal framework, and crucially, the same frustrations. That creates a powerful shared experience of subjugation. Before this, a Bengali's grievance might have been against a local Nawab and a Maratha's grievance against a Peshwa. Now, everyone's grievance was against the crown. It unified the target of their frustration.
Okay, so that's the software of unity, if you will. What about the hardware, the physical connections?
The hardware is just as critical. The text highlights communication and transport, specifically the railways and the postal system. And the text credits Lord Dalhousie for laying these foundations. Now, we have to be absolutely clear. Dalhousie didn't build trains to help Gandhi travel around India.
Oh, of course not.
He built them to move troops quickly to quell rebellions and, more importantly, to move raw materials like cotton to the ports to ship back to Britain.
But the unintended consequence.
The unintended consequence was that people moved. Leaders could interact. A political organizer in Bombay could now actually travel to Calcutta to meet his counterparts. The idea of India could suddenly travel faster than a horse could carry it. The telegraph meant that a protest in one city could be reported in newspapers in another city the very next morning.
And speaking of ideas traveling, we have to talk about language, because India has hundreds, if not thousands, of languages and dialects.
The English language, again another tool of control, meant to create a class of clerks, Indians in blood and color, but English in taste, in opinions. That became the tool of liberation. It became the lingua franca, the link language for the educated elite across the subcontinent.
Because before this, a Tamil speaker and a Bengali speaker couldn't really have a deep political debate, not easily anyway.
Exactly. They just didn't share a common language for complex ideas. But now, a lawyer in Madras could debate policy with a journalist in Bombay because they both spoke English. They could read the same books by John Stuart Mill or Rousseau. They could study the same Western concepts of liberty.
And then you pair that with the press. The source highlights that both the English and the vernacular press, so papers in local languages, played this massive role in arousing national consciousness.
A huge role. It wasn't just about reporting news, was it? It was the spread of concepts.
Right. Ideas.
Ideas like liberty, equality, democracy. The press basically became the open university where the Indian middle class learned about their rights and the hypocrisy of British rule. But, and this is so important to understand, this awakening wasn't just high-minded philosophy. It wasn't born in a debating society. It was rooted in something very, very tangible.
Pain.
Economic pain.
Economic devastation. The text is very clear that the systematic destruction of India's traditional economy was a primary driver of nationalism.
And this is where we need to stop for a second and look at our first PYQ connection. Because the UPSC absolutely loves to ask about the economic impact of British rule. It's a perennial theme. They really do. Let's look at the 2020 CSP Paper 1, Question 23. The question asked, and I'm paraphrasing slightly, which statement best explains the impact of the Industrial Revolution on India in the first half of the 19th century?
Okay, lay it out. What were the options usually like in these types of questions? They're designed to be tricky.
They are. The distractors are usually designed to sound plausible. So options might suggest that modern machines were widely introduced in India, or that railway lines were expanded for public good, or that heavy duties were imposed on British imports to protect Indian industry. All things that sound positive.
But the real answer?
The correct answer, and the one that aligns perfectly with our source text, is A, Indian handicrafts were ruined.
Let's just unpack that for a second. Handicrafts were ruined. It sounds so clinical, almost academic. What does that actually look like on the ground for a real person?
It looks like mass unemployment and famine. The British Industrial Revolution needed two things from India: a source of cheap raw materials, especially cotton, and a captive market for its finished goods. They systematically turned India into a supplier of raw cotton and a dumping ground for finished cloth from Manchester.
And the traditional Indian weaver, who was once world famous for his skill.
Guy was wiped out. A handloom weaver, no matter how skilled, simply cannot compete on price with a steam-powered factory. He was bankrupted. And it wasn't just weavers. It was artisans, potters, tanners, entire communities. This process, often called deindustrialization, decimated the traditional self-sufficient village economy.
So when we talk about the rise of nationalism, we have to remember this. It wasn't just born out of reading about liberty, it was born out of economic misery. The phrase ruin of handicrafts isn't just a line in a textbook. It was the destruction of livelihoods for millions of people, creating this deep, simmering resentment against foreign rule.
Precisely. So you have this foundation of shared economic pain. Then you add the political unity, the railways connecting people. But there was another layer, a very personal one.
The social side of things. The text mentions racial discrimination.
Oh, it was deeply personal. There was a pervasive, suffocating arrogance. The source mentions the ill treatment of Indians in South Africa, which we know Mahatma Gandhi eventually fought against. But you didn't have to go to South Africa to experience it. It happened right here in India. The British treated Indians as second-class citizens in their own country. You couldn't enter certain train compartments. You were barred from certain clubs.
And the biggest flashpoint for this, the moment where the mask really slipped, was the Ilbert Bill controversy, right? This seems to be a pivotal event.
This is a classic example. It happened during Lord Ripon's time as viceroy. Now, Ripon was actually considered one of the good viceroys by many Indians. He was a liberal. He wanted to introduce a bill, the Ilbert Bill, that would allow senior Indian judges to preside over cases involving European offenders.
Which seems like the most basic logic. I mean, if you're a qualified judge, you're a qualified judge. Your race shouldn't matter.
To us, yes, it's common sense. But to the British residents in India, it was an absolute outrage. The idea that a brown man could sit in judgment of a white man was seen as an unacceptable humiliation to their racial prestige. They revolted.
They revolted? You mean like protests?
A full-blown agitation. They called it the White Mutiny. They organized a massive, well-funded campaign against the bill. They used the press. They lobbied Parliament in London. They personally threatened the viceroy. It was an incredibly ugly display of racism.
And did it work?
It worked. They bullied the government into backing down and severely watering down the bill, making it practically useless.
Wow. That must have been a massive slap in the face for the Indian intelligentsia who believed in British justice.
It was a slap in the face, but it was also a masterclass. The source text calls the Ilbert Bill controversy a high watermark in the history of the movement. You have to ask why. Because it taught the Indians a vital lesson. Organized agitation works.
Ah, I see. So it was a tutorial in how to get things done.
Exactly, a tutorial. The white Europeans banded together, they made a lot of noise, they applied pressure, and they got what they wanted. The Indian leaders watched this and realized, wait a minute, if they can do it, why can't we? It shattered the illusion that the British government was this immovable, rational object. It showed that it responded to pressure.
So the British inadvertently taught them the power of protest. That leads us perfectly into our second section, the Indians start organizing. But I think a common misconception is that 1885 just rolls around, the Congress is formed, and that's day one of Indian politics.
Right, and that's historically just not true. The Congress didn't appear out of a vacuum. There were precursors. The source text lists several of these early political associations that really set the stage. And for anyone studying for prelims, these are crucial to remember.
Let's run through them, because these often get asked in those match the following type questions in the prelims, don't they?
All the time. So you had the British Indian Association in Bengal way back in 1851. In Bombay, you had the Bombay Association in 1852, which is associated with a name we'll hear a lot more about, Dadabhai Naoroji.
And he also founded the East India Association in London, right? To lobby the British directly.
That's right. Then in the South, you had the Madras Native Association, also in 1852. And later on, you get more prominent ones like the Pune Sarvajanik Sabha in 1870 and the very important Madras Ashana Sabha in 1884.
So there were all these groups. What was their limitation? Why did we need a national Congress if all these associations already existed?
The key word is regional. They were fragmented. They mostly dealt with local issues, petitioning for better streetlights in Bombay or a reduction in a local tax in Bengal. But the idea of an all-India body was percolating. The leaders realized that if you're going to deal with a national government, a centralized colonial power, you need a national organization. You need a unified voice.
And that brings us to 1885, the birth of the Indian National Congress.
the big event.
Yeah.
And the really interesting and often debated part is that the initiative came from a retired British civil servant, a man named A.O. Hume.
This always surprises people. A British guy started the Indian National Congress. That feels, well, counterintuitive. Why on earth would he do that?
It is deeply ironic. Hume is a complicated figure. The most popular theory, the one supported by many historians, is the safety valve theory.
Explain that concept for us. Safety valve.
Think of a pressure cooker. If the pressure inside builds up and there's nowhere for the steam to go, the whole thing eventually explodes, which is exactly what the revolt of 1857 was. The British were terrified of another 1857. Hume, having been in the civil service, saw the growing unrest, remember the economic ruin and the famines we talked about, and he wanted to create a safety valve, a formal constitutional channel for educated Indians to vent their grievances, to let off steam safely so it wouldn't explode into violence again.
So he wanted a loyal opposition, not a revolution.
Precisely. A platform for debate and petitions, not for planning uprisings.
So set the scene for that first meeting. Where was it? Who was there?
It took place in December 1885 in Bombay. The first president was a prominent Bengali barrister, W.C. Banerjee, and the attendance was tiny by today's standards, only 72 delegates.
Only 72. You could fit them in a large classroom.
A very small group, yes. But the source text emphasizes a crucial point. They were from all over India. It was secular and national from the very first minute. They made a conscious effort to discuss problems that affected all Indians, irrespective of their religion, caste, or language. That was the breakthrough. It wasn't just a Bengali meeting or a Marathi meeting. It was, for the first time, an Indian meeting.
I want to pause here and bring in another PYQ connection. We're talking about these new organizations and the growth of a national consciousness. You mentioned the press earlier. There are two really interesting questions from the 2020 CSP Paper 1 that touch on this broader intellectual atmosphere.
Yes, let's look at question 28. It asks about the Vidal Vidvansak, which was the first monthly journal for the untouchable people. The answer is Gopal Baba Walankar.
So why is this relevant to our discussion on the Congress?
Because it shows that the awakening wasn't just about confronting the British, it was also internal. While the INC was forming to talk to the British about legislative councils, you had these parallel grassroots movements addressing deep-seated social issues like caste within Indian society itself. The awakening was multidimensional. It wasn't just political.
And the other one?
The other one is question 26, which asks about the book Dishar Katha by Sakaram Ganesh Doskar. The question itself explained that this book warned against the colonial state's hypnotic conquest of the mind.
Hypnotic conquest of the mind. That is a seriously powerful phrase. It sounds almost like something out of a Matrix.
It is. And it connects directly back to what we discussed about the economic impact and the drain theory. Duskar's argument was that the British hadn't just conquered India's land. They had hypnotized Indians into believing that British rule was benevolent, that it was for their own good, that their own culture was inferior. This book was hugely influential and inspired many of the later Swadeshi street plays and folk songs. It shows that the national movement wasn't just 72 guys in suits in a room in Bombay. It was also a psychological awakening happening through literature, journalism, and art.
So we have the Congress formed, and the period from 1885 to 1905 is what historians call the moderate phase. Okay, let's unpack this term. Moderate sounds a bit soft, a bit timid. Who were these leaders?
The heavy hitters of this era were men like Dadabhai Naoroji, who was universally respected and known as the Grand Old Man of India. You had W.C. Banerjee, the first president. You had Surendranath Banerjee, who was called the Indian Burke because of his incredible oratory skills. And of course, Gopal Krishna Gokhale, who would later become the political guru of Mahatma Gandhi.
These were the absolute titans of the day. So what did they believe? Were they on the streets demanding, British, get out of India now?
Not even close. In fact, their core belief was essentially loyalty to the crown. They had this deep, and with hindsight we can say almost naive, faith in British justice and fair play. They genuinely believed that the British people and the British Parliament were basically good, just, and democratic.
So if they believed that, then why was India suffering so much under their rule? What was their explanation for that?
They believed it was just a misunderstanding. Their theory was that the British Parliament and the Queen just didn't know how badly the bureaucracy in India was behaving, that the officials here were un-British. They thought if we just told them nicely, if we presented the facts logically, they would see the error of their ways and fix it.
So their strategy was basically writing strongly worded letters.
Essentially, yes. The text calls their method The 3PS, petitions, prayers, and protests. But really, it was all about constitutional agitation. They held meetings, they passed resolutions, they wrote pamphlets. They wanted reform, not revolution. They wanted to improve the system, not overthrow it.
Okay, so what were their specific demands? If they weren't asking for independence, what were they actually asking for?
A few key things. They wanted the legislative councils to be expanded. Basically, they wanted a bigger seat at the table to advise the government. They wanted the Indian Civil Services exams, ICS, to be held simultaneously in India and England.
That was a huge barrier for Indians, right? The exam being only in London.
A massive one. You had to be from an incredibly wealthy family to even afford the trip to London to sit for the exam. It effectively barred 99.9% of Indians, so holding it in India was a demand for fairness and access. They also wanted the separation of the judiciary from the executive, which is a basic democratic principle we take for granted today, and very importantly, a reduction in military spending.
It all sounds very sensible, very lawyer-like, not very fiery.
It was. Most of them were lawyers, journalists, teachers, the educated elite. They spoke the language of the law and the Constitution.
But this brings us to a critical analysis point. If their demands were so sensible, why do we often hear that they failed? This is where we need to look at the 2017 Mains GS Paper 1, Question 3. This is where the rubber really meets the road for our listeners.
This is a fantastic question for a deep dive. The question asks, why did the moderates fail to carry conviction with the nation about their proclaimed ideology and political goals by the end of the 19th century?
That's a really short question. Fail to carry conviction with the nation. In other words, why didn't the people buy what they were selling? How do we answer that using the information in our source text?
The source text gives us all the keys. First, and this is a direct point, it explicitly says they confined their political activities to the educated classes only. They didn't go to the villages. They didn't mobilize the peasants or the factory workers.
So they were basically an elitist club.
In a way, yes. They had this belief that the masses weren't ready for politics yet. They saw politics as a gentleman's game of debate and petitions. They completely missed the potential power of the crowd.
Okay, that's the first reason. What's the second?
Their core method, that unshakable faith in British goodwill, started to look increasingly delusional to the average Indian. While the moderates were petitioning, the country was being ravaged by devastating famines and the bubonic plague during the 1890s. The British response was often brutal, incompetent, or just indifferent.
So while people are literally dying of plague and starvation, the moderates are still writing polite letters to London.
Exactly. The disconnect became glaring. The moderates kept petitioning, but the results were negligible. The text does mention the Indian Councils Act of 1892 as a minor success. It expanded the council slightly, but it was seen as too little, too late. The massive gap between the moderates' proclaimed loyalty and the harsh reality of British rule created this political vacuum that was just waiting to be filled by a more aggressive ideology. They failed to convince the nation because the nation was hungry and angry, and the moderates were being polite.
However, we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater, should we? The moderates did have one absolutely massive achievement. It wasn't political exactly, it was intellectual, it was economic.
Yes, this is their undeniable redeeming legacy. The economic critique of colonialism. This is where they stopped being polite and started being forensic accountants.
And that brings us to Section 4, the drain theory. This is Dadabhai and Naoroji's absolute masterpiece.
Naoroji wrote a book with a very telling, very clever title, Poverty and Un-British Rule in India.
Un-British rule. I love that. It's such a sick burn for the 19th century. He's using their own branding, their own sense of superiority against them.
It's brilliant rhetoric, isn't it? He's saying, you claim to be just and fair, that's what it means to be British, but your rule here is unjust and exploitative, therefore it is un-British. But the core of the book, the real bombshell, was the drain theory.
How does he explain it? What is the drain?
He argued, with meticulous data, that India wasn't poor by accident or because Indians were lazy or superstitious. India was being systematically made poor. India's wealth was being siphoned off drain to England year after year. He compared it to a bleeding wound that never healed. He fundamentally shifted the blame for India's poverty from fate to British policy.
How is this drain actually happening? Was it just, looting treasures?
No, it was far more insidious because it was systemic and legal. The text lists the channels very specifically. 1. Salaries of British officials in India, paid from Indian taxes. 2. Pensions of retired British officials living back in London again, paid by the Indian taxpayer. 3. Savings of British personnel sent home. 4. The profits of British companies trading in India that were repatriated to Britain.
And the infamous home charges.
Yes, the home charges.
Yeah.
These were payments India was forced to make to Britain for the privilege of being ruled. It covered all the costs of the India office in London, military stores purchased in England, interest on debts.
So India was effectively paying rent to live in its own house and paying for the chains that bound it.
That's a perfect way to put it. And Naoroji backed all of this up with hard data. This was a political earthquake. It completely shattered the myth of the benevolent British rule. You couldn't argue with the math. The impact was so profound that the British were actually forced to appoint a royal commission, the Welby Commission, to investigate these charges.
And guess who they had to put on the commission to give it any credibility?
Naoroji himself. He became the first Indian member of such a high-profile commission. This intellectual foundation, the core idea that British rule is economically extractive and is the cause of our poverty, became the bedrock for all future nationalism. You simply can't have the later Swadeshi movement without Naoroji first explaining why you should boycott foreign goods. He provided the why for the entire struggle.
That connects the dots perfectly. The moderates provided the theory, the later generations would provide the action. Now, since we are doing a deep dive into the Tamil Nadu board book, we have to talk about Section 5, the role of Tamil Nadu.
We absolutely must. The text provides some really specific details that often get overlooked in general histories that tend to focus heavily on Bengal, Maharashtra, and Punjab. Tamil Nadu was a real powerhouse of early nationalism.
We mentioned the Madras Mahajana Sabha from 1884 a bit earlier.
Yes, and it was a strong and early support of the Congress. But let's talk about an individual, G. Subramanya Iyer.
The man behind the Hindu newspaper, a legendary figure.
The very same. He founded the Hindu in English and also Swadeshi in Tamil, which was crucial for taking these nationalist ideas beyond the English-speaking elite. But here's a fantastic fact for your notes that really defines his importance. At the very first session of the Indian National Congress in 1885, the first resolution ever tabled was moved by G. Subramanya Iyer.
Wow, that is a great trivia point. So the first official voice of the Congress, the first motion ever put on the table, was from Tamil Nadu.
Yes, and he wasn't just a politician. The text highlights that he was a social reformer. He arranged for the remarriage of his own widowed daughter, which in 1889 was a radical, almost dangerous act that could get you ostracized. It shows that these early leaders were trying to modernize Indian society from within while also fighting the British. They were fighting on two fronts.
And the text also mentions the Congress sessions that were held in Madras, which was a big deal at the time.
A very big deal. It showed the movement's geographical spread. The third session, in 1887, was held in Madras, and it was presided over by Badruddin Tyabji.
The first Muslim president of the INC.
Correct. And holding that session in Madras reinforces the secular, all-India nature of the movement we discussed earlier. Think about the signal that sends. The Congress went from Bombay with W.C. Banerjee, a Hindu, to Calcutta with Dadabhai Naoroji, a Parsi, to Madras with Badruddin Tyabji, a Muslim. They were making a very deliberate statement with their geography and their leadership. They were actively proving they weren't just a regional Hindu club.
Okay, so we've covered the polite phase, the petitions, the economic theories, but now we hit the turn of the century, 1905. The mood changes dramatically. Section 6, the rise of extremism and the Partition of Bengal.
And here's where it gets really interesting. This is the definitive shift from prayer to protest.
So why did it happen? Why did an entire generation of educated Indians suddenly stop believing in the good British?
The source text points to three main causes. First, as we just discussed, the abject failure of the moderate methods. People were just tired of waiting for crumbs from the table. They saw 20 years of petitions with almost no concrete results. Second, there were international events. In 1904-05, Japan, a small Asian nation, defeated Russia, a massive European empire, in a war.
That was huge, right? The news must have spread like wildfire, an Asian power defeating a European giant.
It was seismic. It completely shattered the myth of European invincibility that had dominated the colonial world for a century. For Indians, it was a massive psychological boost. The thinking went, wait a minute, Japan is small, Russia is huge. If Japan can defeat a European power, why can't we? It gave them a newfound confidence.
But the third and most immediate cause wasn't an event. It was a person, Lord Curzon.
Curzon. He's almost the perfect villain for our story.
He really played the part, didn't he? He seems to have had a deep contempt for Indian aspirations.
A profound contempt. He was the archetype of the arrogant, efficient imperialist. His entire rule was reactionary. He passed the Calcutta Corporation Act in 1899, which reduced the number of elected Indian members, giving the British a permanent majority. Then he passed the Universities Act in 1904.
What did that do?
It essentially turned universities into government departments. He saw that universities were becoming hotbeds of nationalism, that students were becoming political, so he moved to crush their autonomy. He strengthened the Sedition Act and the Official Secrets Act. He was practically daring Indians to revolt. He believed he could crush the spirit of the nation simply by tightening the administrative screws.
And then he dropped the bomb, the Partition of Bengal.
1905, the big one. The text is very clear that the official reason given was administrative efficiency.
Was there any truth to that at all?
To be fair, Bengal was a massive province. It included modern-day Bihar, Jharkhand, and parts of Odisha. It was unwieldy to govern, so there's a tiny grain of truth there. But the source text is emphatic about the real motive.
Divide and rule, the classic imperial strategy.
The absolute classic. The real goal was to divide Hindus and Muslims and to break the nerve center of Bengali nationalism. Bengal was the intellectual and political brain of the resistance movement. By splitting it, they hoped to split the political power. They carved it into West Bengal, which became a Hindu-majority province, and Eastern Bengal and Assam, which became a Muslim-majority province. They openly tried to woo the Muslims with promises of a province where they would dominate, hoping to turn the two communities against each other and fatally weaken the Congress.
When did this officially happen?
It was put into effect on October 16, 1905. And the text notes it was observed as a day of mourning all across Bengal. People fasted. They walked barefoot in processions to the Ganges, singing patriotic songs. In a powerful symbol of unity, Hindus and Muslims tied Rakis on each other's wrists to show that the British line on a map could not break their brotherhood.
Let's do a PYQ linkage here, because the partition is a guaranteed favorite topic for UPSC.
It is. A great example is from 2014 CSP Paper 1, Question 81. The question asks, the Partition of Bengal made by Lord Curzon in 1905 lasted until...
Oh, that's a good question, because it didn't actually last forever, did it?
No, it didn't. The anti-partition agitation was so fierce, so sustained, that the British eventually had to cave. The correct answer is B. King George V abrogated Curzon's act at the Royal Durbar in Delhi in 1911. The provinces were reunited.
So the movement actually worked. It forced a reversal of a major imperial policy. But let's talk about the movement itself, the Swadeshi Movement. This was the direct, spontaneous reaction to the partition.
And this was the birth of modern mass politics in India. This wasn't just about petitions anymore. The first pillar was boycott. A boycott of foreign goods, especially British cloth. Bonfires of Manchester cloth were burning at crossroads in Calcutta. It became a point of national honor to wear only rough, hand-spun Indian khadi.
And the flip side of boycott was Swadeshi.
Exactly. Promoting Indian-made goods. Wear Indian cloth, use Indian soap, put your money in Indian banks, start Indian insurance companies. And the third pillar was national education.
Right, because if you're boycotting British institutions, and Curzon had already attacked the universities with his act, you need your own alternatives.
So national schools and colleges began to spring up all over Bengal. The text is clear that this whole agitation intensified the national movement like nothing before it. Mahatma Gandhi himself later wrote that the real awakening of India took place after the partition of Bengal. It was the spark that finally lit the fuse of the freedom struggle.
This new, more aggressive energy naturally brought new leaders to the forefront. The Extremists. I always love that name. It sounds so radical, but they were really just demanding more assertiveness, weren't they?
Well, the British called them extremists as a term of abuse. They preferred to call themselves nationalists. And the famous trio that led this faction was Lal Balpal.
Lala Lajpat Rai from Punjab, known as the Lion of Punjab, Mal Gangadhar Tilak from Maharashtra, and Bipin Chandra Pal from Bengal, a truly all-India leadership.
And we really must focus on Bal Gangadhar Tilak. He is the one who captured the new mood of the nation and gave the movement its war cry. The text quotes his immortal words, "Swaraj is my birthright, and I will have it."
Swaraj, self-rule, not just please reform the councils, but this is my country and I will have it. That is a massive shift in tone from the moderates.
It's a complete paradigm shift. Tilak was a powerhouse. He realized the moderates were too disconnected from the common people. So he used popular Hindu festivals like the Ganapati festival and Shivaji festivals to mobilize the masses, to bring politics out of the elite drawing rooms and into the streets. He used his newspapers Kesari in Marathi and Maratha in English to attack the British government directly and fearlessly. The text notes he was jailed twice for sedition and eventually deported to Mandalay in Burma for 6 years.
But this new energy, this new leadership inevitably led to a clash within the Congress, right? The old guard, the moderates, must have been horrified.
They were terrified. They genuinely thought this new method of direct action, the boycotts, the strikes, the mass protests, would bring down severe British repression and crush the Congress organization they had carefully built for 2 decades. They thought the extremists were being reckless and irresponsible. The friction just built and built until it finally exploded in 1907.
The Surat split.
Yes, the annual Congress session was held in Surat, and it was absolute chaos. The moderates wanted to pass resolutions that were, mild and constitutional. The extremists wanted to pass a resolution making boycott in Swadeshi the official policy for the entire country, turning it into a mass struggle for Swaraj. They clashed openly on the stage.
And it literally broke the party in two.
It did. The session descended into chaos, shoes were thrown, and it ended in a formal split. The extremists, led by Tilak, walked out. The Congress, as an organization, remained under the control of the moderates.
What was the immediate result of this split? Who benefited?
It was a tactical disaster for the national movement, at least in the short term. The text notes that this split severely weakened the movement. And the British, of course, were delighted. With the extremists out on their own, the British could easily use their classic stick-and-carrot policy.
Explain that policy for us.
The stick. They came down hard on the extremists. Tilak was sent to jail for 6 years. Other leaders were arrested or went into exile. They crushed the movement with an iron fist. The carrot. They offered mild reforms to the moderates to keep them happy and to reward them for getting rid of the troublemakers. These reforms became the Minto-Morley reforms of 1909.
Which ironically introduced separate electorates for Muslims, sowing the seeds for another, more dangerous kind of division. But that, as you said, is a story for the next chapter.
It certainly is. But if we just step back and look at this period we've covered, 1885 to 1905, it's an absolutely incredible journey.
It really is. We started with a fragmented subcontinent. We saw how the railways and the English language accidentally knit the elite together. We saw the very polite, very intellectual moderates lay the crucial foundation with the drain theory. And then we saw the explosion of energy with the Partition of Bengal that brought the masses into the streets for the first time.
And I think it raises a fascinating final question for our listeners to ponder. The moderates are so often criticized for being too soft, too loyal. We call them the prayer and petition guys. But think about this. Without their meticulous economic critique, without Naoroji spending years proving with hard data that India was being bled dry, could the extremists have ever successfully mobilized the masses?
That's a brilliant point. You need the theory before you can have the revolution. You need the diagnosis before you can prescribe the cure. In a way, the moderates built the intellectual stage that Tilak and later Gandhi would stand upon.
Exactly. And even their supposed origin as a safety valve. Well, it turns out the safety valve eventually grew teeth and became the engine that dismantled the entire empire.
What a journey. From the quiet boardrooms of Bombay to the burning bonfires of foreign cloth on the streets of Bengal.
And you have to remember, this is just the beginning. The next phase brings in the Home Rule Leagues, the Lucknow Pact, and eventually the arrival of a certain lawyer from South Africa named Gandhi.
We will absolutely cover all of that in the next deep dive. But for now, let's wrap this one up.
If you found value in this deep dive, if you had an aha moment about the drain theory or the Surat split, please subscribe to Simplified UPSC by PPP. It's the easiest way to support what we do.
And if you are in a position to do so, please consider supporting us on Patreon. It really does help us keep this quality up and the content coming. And to all our current supporters, a huge thank you. You are the ones who make this possible.
Don't forget to like the video and leave a comment. Tell us what you think. Do you believe the moderates were too soft? Or were they actually smart strategists playing a very long game? We would love to hear your take.
And of course, head over to the Telegram channel for the free notes and those PYQs we discussed. You need to see the questions for yourself to really understand the UPSC pattern.
And for the truly serious learners who want the full archive, the premium notes with model answers, and the organized video library, just DM us on the public Telegram channel to join the private library.
Thank you so much for listening. Keep learning and stay curious.
And we'll see you in the next deep dive.